Hi everybody, Luke Filmboss here, and I have just finished up watching Amazon's Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, and I have to say, it was an experience. Now, I made a video a while back talking about how I wasn't excited for it. I just really wasn't into what Amazon was doing with The Lord of the Rings, and how it kind of disrespected Tolkien and the work that he made. And while Amazon's show, after watching it, definitely does a lot of that, I can't say I'm really upset because it doesn't hurt me any. Now, sure, I understand why there might be a lot of fans saying that this is the worst thing ever, that it's just complete dog wash. And they're right. But I didn't think it was entirely bad. I told myself that if the show was at least good, then I would be okay with it. If the filmmaking behind it was solid, if the story was insightful. And so I'm okay with it. Even though the show was absolutely none of those things. Now, to start us off, episode 1, I was worried that all of my fears about this show were right and that this was going to be the worst thing I ever watched. Because episode 1 was awful. It just reinforced every fear that I had about this show. But luckily, the best episode came right after it. Because episode 2, I thought, actually started getting interesting. There were some interesting characters introduced, some interesting plot threads that kind of went nowhere. But there was some interesting sequences, especially with the dwarves. I think that was probably some of the best stuff in episode 2. And the Harfoots weren't terrible, although I really did not like whatever her name is, Poppy, the female version of Sam, only she has no redeeming quality characteristics like Sam did. She's just annoying and a coward. But yeah, episode 2 kind of was better, and then after that the show just was mediocre. There was a pretty good episode 6, and I think that's only good because that's the only episode that had a really good fight scene in it. And there was some action in this show, but not a lot of it. And so episode 6 had this one really good fight scene, and that's about all the show had. So yeah. And then there was something big that happened at the end of episode 6 that made me really like it, although I guess some people didn't like it. But I guess what you could say about this show is that it was just mostly mediocre. Every episode, there was some semi-fun or interesting plots going on with some decent characters that made the episode watchable. And then there was all of the boring stuff, mostly that takes place with Numenor and the Southlands and Galadriel. Pretty much all of that is almost entirely disposable, both in terms of how interesting the plot was and the characters, everything. The show itself disposes of half of the characters by the end of the season. I'll get more into that. But yeah, this show is just painfully average, but somewhat hilariously average. The only reason I'm okay with this is because I refuse to admit or refuse to believe that this show is in the same continuity with Peter Jackson's work. I enjoyed The Hobbits, and I love The Lord of the Rings. I almost loved the Hobbit trilogy, but some of the films, Desolation of Smaug was really good. I really loved that film. But the other two are just really good, not great. But Lord of the Rings is some of the best stuff ever made, for film. And then this show is pretty much it feels like a student film, only it's an 8-episode show. It's almost hilariously ironic. I just love this show because it's literally $1 billion fan fiction that literally looks like a fan fiction. Some of the shots and cinematography aren't bad, but they just don't capture the same essence that Peter Jackson's films did. The music is not bad, but it's just forgettable and mediocre. And unlike Peter Jackson's, which is legendary, memorable, it works with the film to get you to feel every emotion, whether that's the anxiety, the sadness, the joy, all of those things worked in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. None of that is present here, and it's laughably boring. It's hilarious. I loved watching this show just because of how much I could make fun of it. And it's not even a terrible show. It's just like a sitcom version of The Lord of the Rings, only it's not actually funny, it's not actually comedic, but it's just fun to laugh at. And it's like quality, both the writing, the visuals, the characters, the dialogue, it's all so base level and like so just bland. Like the show, I guess the word I would use to describe the Rings of Power is it's bland. The filmmakers, the show writers, none of them knew how to make this show. The plot is pointless, pretty much. This show should have been condensed and maybe the plot would have been bearable. But the plot, there's so many different plot lines and each one of them are just like a half-baked chicken nugget in comparison to the overall story of Middle-earth. And then there's some interesting, like, you realize that at least one of the plot points is actually served a bigger purpose, except it really didn't, because it could have been cut down. And because this show has been out for a while, I'm going to go full into spoilers. So from here on out, there's going to be spoilers. But essentially, there is this plot where it's so basic. It's literally just Galadriel's voyage, or not voyage, but her revenge story to take down Sauron, to just find him and kill him because of what he did to her. And so that's what gets things kind of kicked off with that whole storyline. And then there's the Southland storyline, which is like the most pointless thing ever. You got this lady and her son, and I don't remember their names. And then there's this black elf, which I won't even get into how that makes absolutely no sense and just isn't Lord of the Rings. But let's just buy it for now that there's a black elf, and this is in the Lord of the Rings. And so there's this black elf who looks absolutely nothing like any of the other elves. Like, not just his skin color, like, that's fine. But the way he does his hair, the way he talks, the way he does anything is just completely un-elf-like. So pretty much you have these three characters and a few other just random bozos who live in the Southlands. And they have their own little side plot, which is them pretty much having this revolt against the orcs. Which pretty much goes nowhere because in the end they just lose. Like, what? Eventually the Númenóreans come to help the Southlanders and it seems like they got this victory and then it all just goes to pot. And pretty much, yeah, Mount Doom is created. And I remember watching this show and being like, okay, when that happened in episode 6, that's the big thing. Mount Doom is created and Mordor is pretty much born by just covering the land in fire and ash. And like that ending finale was like, wow, that is actually pretty interesting. And that was after the pretty good fight scene, the only good fight scene that still had some lesser qualities than the actual Lord of the Rings. But it was like, okay, this is pretty good. But then I think to myself, so you're telling me this entire show, practically the entire plot, Númenor, the Southlands, that's like half of the show, if not much more than half of the show, was dedicated to this plot line of making these developing these characters and bringing them here to this point. And it literally wasn't even about those people. It was literally about the orcs and the freaking orc daddy elf dude who kind of just disappears after episode 6. It's just about them digging these holes to get water from a dam to Mount Doom so that they can blow it up, and that's pretty much the essence of the plot. You did not have to drag that out through 8 episodes, but they did that. And what's even more hilarious is I'm going to talk about the characters now, and some of these characters are absolutely 100% disposable. I liked a few of them. I liked Durin, and I liked Elrond. That was probably the one plot line, and the few characters that I actually enjoyed was Durin and Elrond and finding out about the Mithril. That plot line goes absolutely nowhere. I do think that they're probably going to follow up with that plot line in the future seasons, but it had absolutely no conclusion. I'm going to talk more about that later. But let's get back to the Southlands. So this mother figure, not mother figure, this mother of this kid finds like this sword, like it's a Morgul blade or something. It turns out to be a key to this dam that breaks the dam, which makes no sense, but whatever. We'll go with that. Yay. So yeah, he finds this sword, and the whole thing is like the orcs are trying to get this sword from them after they dig their holes and they beat up the black elf dude, and he gets reunited. And so the orcs are trying to get this sword, and so the lady, the kid's mom, brings this revolution to protect the people of the Southlands and rise up against the orcs. And so they fight, and they have this big old battle. And in the end, there's just this old guy who, he was in like the one episode. He like scares the kid, and he's like, "Give me, or come with me, take the sword, come with me, blah 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 blah." And so he's like telling the kid like, "Oh, that's a powerful thing." I really have no idea who this old dude was. He was just an old dude who tried to get the sword, tried to get the kid to give him the sword or whatever, blah, blah, blah. The show makes no sense. Somehow the old dude gets the sword. I don't even remember how he gets the sword. It happens in the battle, I guess. Oh, wait, no, I remember. The orcs do capture some of the people, and then the kid gives up the sword. And so now the old guy has a sword. He climbs up to this mountain, he puts the sword in, which is a key, and he breaks the dam, and the dam comes down, and the water goes through the tunnels that were so strategically placed in the story, and strategically placed by the orcs to lead right to Mount Doom, where it brings up the eruption and everything big happens. And it was pretty cool, and like, I like that scene. But it's like, we spent the entire show following the Southlands uprising, not to mention the Sauron twist, where Galadriel meets this dude called Hellband or some Hell something, and like, I will give this the show writers credit. He was one of the characters I actually liked. I thought was interesting, and I wasn't quite sure who he was. Like, was he going to be like the Witch King, or was he going to be like, I don't know, a good king? I don't know. Was he going to be just like some random ranger at the end of the day? Or was maybe he like, I saw some stuff online about him being, the ghost dude from the Return of the King, from the Paths of the Dead. Like, he was going to be that dude who got banished or whatever. It turns out he's Sauron, and I'm okay with that, except for the fact that the entire plot was kind of like making you think, oh, he's going to come back, he's going to be the king of the Southlanders, and they're going to rise up. And it's like, yeah, you guys surprised me. You actually did a good job of misleading me, but you just really not retcon, but you just made the entire rest of the show pointless. Like, literally the entire Southland plot could be condensed into one episode where the orcs come, they get the sword, they make Mount Doom, and Mordor is Mordor now. Instead, they drag it over 8 episodes, and it's hilarious how much wasted time, how much pointless plot filler was just shoved into this show to get us to a point that I thought was a pretty good payoff, but then just leads to no payoff in the end, because the Black Elf, I forget what happens to him. The mom and her son, I forget what happens to them, because they literally have no conclusion in this show. Maybe they'll be in the second season and further on, but they honestly seem to have had no purpose in the show whatsoever. Yet the showrunners tried to make it seem like they were this big part of the story, when it turns out none of the story was even about them, because what they do doesn't matter in the slightest by the end of the season. They literally do nothing. Literally, it's embarrassing how much the Black Elf gets beaten up. Like, the show writers went through all of this trouble to cast a black person as an elf, and then they completely just honestly embarrass him as a character. Like, when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, it's so embarrassing. Like, he gets beaten so bad. Like, at the beginning of the show, like the first episode, Galadriel literally single-handedly takes down a 10-foot ice troll or something like that. Don't know what it's called, but this troll, she takes it down single-handedly by herself in literally less than 10 seconds. It takes her less than 10 seconds to completely demolish, like, this troll. Like, literally the Fellowship in Fellowship of the Ring took, like, how long to take down the cave troll. Galadriel just swings in with her sword, takes it down in 5 seconds. And then this black elf literally cannot even take down a 7-foot orc by himself. He has to be saved because he's about to be killed by this orc, and then he has to be saved by the woman who's leading the rebellion. They, like, give us this singular black elf, and then he gets upstaged by the white woman. It's kind of ironically stupid how this show thought that was a good idea. Like, the black elf literally serves no purpose in this show at all, and that's kind of disappointing because I feel like they could have done a good job if they made him more like an elf, like, rather than just some black dude who literally cannot even fight for himself. It was embarrassing, and I felt like it did more disrespect to their diversity than it did, you know, give it strength. It's hilarious. Not to mention the whole dwarven plot line with Elrond ultimately also serves no purpose in the show as well. I mean, I guess it did. They get that little chunk of mithril. Woohoo! And I guess they are going to continue that plot line, and it did give us probably some of the most entertaining parts of the show. So at least I'll give it credit to that. But once again, there's really no conclusion. But in the trailer for The Rings of Power, like, they were trying to, like, get everybody excited because of the Balrog. We were going to see the Balrog again. Remember the Balrog from Fellowship of the Ring? And I was like, okay, it's the Balrog. Like, we already got, like, an epic moment in the Mines of Moria when Gandalf goes face to face with the Balrog, and then in the Two Towers when he completely beats the crap out of it. And then they're like, oh, Rings of Power has the Balrog. Aren't you so excited? Look at this shot of the Balrog in our show. And it's like, you get to the show and it's like, okay, where's the Balrog? It literally, that clip they used in the trailer is literally the only clip in the show. It's literally just like, was trailer bait that they threw into the show to try to get people to come. Because, like, I guess they didn't think people would be interested in enough in just having a Lord of the Rings show. They have to, like, give all these little, you know, market baits to get people in. Like, literally, the Balrog shows up one time. I think it's either in the final episode, I believe it was. It literally serves no purpose outside of to say, oh, the Balrog's down there. Okay, you came here for the Balrog? Too bad. That's how this show works. It has almost no setup and payoff outside of a few plot lines. Like, by the end of the show, the 3 elven rings are created, and so that is why the dwarven plotline does play a role. But literally, we have no indication that it's going to be tied to the making of the rings. Like, that's just kind of thrown into the final episode. It's like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. There was, like, no foreshadowment, no indication that they were going to forge the rings, or that there's a purpose for the rings. Though there's a reason why the elves needed mithril. It's because their light was dying, and they needed the light of the mithril to, otherwise the race would die, or something. It's complicated. I don't even know if it's book accurate to Tolkien's work, but that's the reason, and it's kind of like not explained. It's just kind of like, oh, this is what needs to happen. So they make the rings, and it's hooray. I will say, at least the sequence where they're forging the rings was a nice sequence. Yeah, that pretty much, I don't mind this show existing just because there's some very minor moments that make it alright. It's like, this show doesn't hurt me by existing. I can just refuse to admit that it's in continuity with Peter Jackson's work. It's Lord of the Rings. Some good stuff, some bland stuff, some very pointless stories and plot. Literally, there's barely any plot in the in the entire show. And then you get to the end, it's like, boom, Mount Doom, boom, Sauron. That was Sauron. Okay, it's not really the most well written, but okay, we got Sauron finally. You surprised me with that. And then you get the Forging of the Rings. It's like, that's out of nowhere. But hey, the sequence was cool, and so now we get to see a very well-made sequence of the making of the Elven Rings in the Lord of the Rings. So although the entire show in getting to there was completely pointless and kind of bland and dumb and poorly written, it just felt like a sitcom. Even down to the visuals, like they have so much money to spend into it, and the visuals just sometimes, like, they look good. Some shots were really good, like I acknowledged, especially that forging of the ring scene at the very end. And like the CGI is okay, but like each shot just is missing something that should be there. Like, it just seems flat. It seems dull. It doesn't seem like it has that layer or the depths. And then the characters are just mostly one-dimensional. Galadriel has to be addressed. She is one of the most annoying, arrogant, just full of herself people in the entire anything that I've seen. And she's like, she gets a little bit better than she was in episode 1, but episode 1 was tragic. She continues to be a douchebag throughout the entire show. Like, this is not even Galadriel. First off, most of the elves don't even look like elves. Galadriel is the worst case. Like, what about her screams she's an elf? Outside of the fact that you see, once in a while, you see a pointy ear, which are mostly covered up in the show due to her hair. It's like, in the Lord of the Rings that Peter Jackson made, you could tell when you saw an elf. Like, no matter what, you could tell that's an elf, that's a dwarf, that's a hobbit. In this show, it's like, that's an elf? Galadriel's an elf? Like, yeah. Galadriel is literally the most unlikable person I've watched in this show. Not to mention Isildur is in this show. This is not going to have a timeless effect on me. I'm probably almost never going to go back and rewatch this. Ever, probably. Like, I have no interest. I've watched it one time, and I feel like I would like it less if I watched it again, because there's no more shock value. There's no more like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. It's dumb, but it's kind of gonna be entertaining to me because it's funny because of how out of nowhere it was. Like, this whole show is like, what were they thinking? It's pointless. This show makes no sense. Like, some of it makes sense, some of it's okay. And there's no emotion. Like, literally, okay, there was in episode 2. Like, when Durin is like talking to Elrond about how he left him, how Elrond left him and for 20 years, and how that's a long time for a dwarf, while it might not seem like much. Like, why didn't the show explore some of these pretty interesting themes, and just, it focused on boring exposition and plot filler and boring plots that go nowhere, and it tries to have like some impactful moments, like Poppy's and Nori's goodbye at the end when Nori goes off to be with Gandalf, and they try to make it seem like this emotional time. Then the music doesn't help it at all, like Peter Jackson's did. Like, the music is just boring, and like, I didn't ever pick up on the music ever. And then it's just like, I don't really care about Poppy. Like, she was annoying. I did not like her. And then Nori was okay, but like, she didn't have any, like, you kind of saw some defining characteristics, but she didn't really have anything super deep about her. She was just a likable character, which at best, with the characters, I guess you could say they range from likable to unlikable, like Galadriel. You have likable characters like Elrond most times, Durin, and Nori are likable characters. Unlikable characters, Poppy, Galadriel, Isildur, who the show tries to make it out like he's dead or something, like he died in the fire, whatever, even though we know, if you watch the first 10 minutes of The Lord of the Rings, that he's not dead, because obviously he's the one who cuts off Sauron's fingers and gets the ring. This show is, I don't understand what the filmmakers were doing, and yet I can't even say the show is bad. Like, it's just so bland. It's just like a nothing. Like, I should probably, just due to the laziness of the writing, the filler that is kind of boring at times, like, I shouldn't give this show as much credit as I do. But yet, I still, while some of the episodes were bad, most of them were mediocre, and a couple of them were pretty good. Somehow the show got an overall good rating from my standard anyway. 65 and up is considered a passing grade for me on my filmmaking spectrum. And while most of the episodes range from bad to not quite good, the show overall got a 66% when I tallied up all the episodes. It's like, how did it even manage to get onto a passing grade? Like, this show was just, there's nothing there. Like, it's watchable. It's not super offensive, although they did completely destroy Galadriel as a character, which is one of the main reasons I refuse to say this is the same Galadriel that we see in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. If we get a second season only to get a few moments like that birthing of Mount Doom and the creation of Mordor or the forging of the Rings of Power, like if we just get these seasons for those moments, like I'm okay with it, even though the rest of the show is almost an entirely pointless wash. Not everything threads together to make a work of art. It's kind of messy and disjointed and wasted. There's so much time wasted. I just spent 8 hours of my life watching this show. That's 1 hour less than the entirety of the unextended editions of The Lord of the Rings. Talk about how much wasted time and potential was put into this show. I hope season 2 can redeem it and we get 8 hours of eventful, impactful, high stakes Middle Earth storylines and not whatever we got with Rings of Power. So yeah, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power is a $1 billion bust. It's wasted, it's pointless, but there's a few good moments and a few good characters that, although their plot lines kind of ended up going nowhere by the end of the season, at least there was at least something here. It kind of like, it's like eating a squished McDonald's burger, like one of those single patty cheeseburgers from McDonald's that gets squished, and like you eat it and it tastes good like for that moment, but it just doesn't really leave any impact on you. Like it doesn't fill you, it doesn't give you any nutrition. And then you have Hobbits and The Lord of the Rings, which are like this gourmet 5-course 5-star dinner. And then you have the little burger, which is the Rings of Power. So thanks everybody for watching this very long rant about the Rings of Power. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power got a 66% from the film boss. So at least you could watch it once in your life and it wouldn't be a terrible experience. Unlike She-Hulk, which I'm going to be getting into very shortly. Bye!